Collectibles tonight. At 8 o'clock, David Copperfield is supposed to join us. In the meantime, Mark Jensen is going to talk to us about his collection and what he's got with LeGrand David, and maybe even a little bit of Wizzo the Wizard, I'm hoping. So, Mark, won't you take it away? Okay.
Okay, Dal requested that I talk a little bit about my LeGrand David collection. If you're not familiar with LeGrand David, they had the longest running continuous show for 35 years from 1977 to 2012. And they had an auction then in 2014 where the majority of their props and other items went up for sale. This shows it a little better. I'm switching my orientation. But what you see there is a painting from their theater done by Rick Heath. And then as I move down, you'll see the table. Now, this table was used both to open the show. LeGrand David, who was David Bull, would open it doing his rice bowls. And then in one in front of the curtain, Marco the Magician, Cesario, would perform his rice and orange trick. And right here in the center of it, you can see his rice and orange trick that he would perform. Then in 2016, they had another auction. And off of that one, I picked up this collection of limited edition coins and such, some that they only gave out to special guests, others that they would sell. And then I also have several of their books and programs and things that they would, have at their theater. Now, moving a little here to the left, since we are the Willard the Wizard IBM ring, this is Willard the Wizard's vase, cone, beans, and orange trick, one of his favorite tricks. And what was a real thrill for me is at Frank's TAOM, David Charvet actually performed this trick. So that was a lot of fun for me. And then, obviously, those of you who have been to my house know that what I'm showing is just like the tip of the iceberg. So I'm just going to kind of slowly move along here and just show part of things. This Hindu deity god thing here, Buddha actually, is from Marshall Bourdain's collection, and he had it next to his Temple of Binaries that had been built by and belonged to Jack Quinn, and Marshall would always say it was to keep thieves away. So there we go. Kind of continuing on. This hat here really isn't magic, even though it's kind of cool because it's Benny Hill's cowboy hat. And one of the things I just kind of wanted to say about that as a collector is if you look at it, it's clearly seen better days. And, to be honest, it didn't cost me that much. I picked it up at an auction for $180 plus shipping, but I checked into having it restored, which I thought, as a preservationist, as Dow kind of mentioned, would be really cool. But to have it restored would run from $1,200 to $2,000. And after restoration, it'd only be worth about $800. So until I get Randy Pitchford kind of funds, this is going to be as good as it gets. Now,
Mark, what's that made out of?
Latex type foam.
Okay.
And then going up here, here's a little Wizzo the Wizard for Eric. Marshall Bourdain, who was Wizzo the Wizard, for those of you who don't know, was on the Bozo Show in Chicago for 27 of its 40 years. The Bozo Show was the most popular kids show of all time. In fact, at its peak, there was an 8-year waiting list to get tickets to the show. So pregnant moms with their unborn kids would go ahead and put their names in just so they could go to the Bozo Show.
I was on it.
What'd you say?
I was on it.
Well, cool.
I was on it.
Well, cool. Now, moving up, there's a autographed picture to me of Wizzo. This painting here was done, by the studio and hung in the studio there at WGN in Chicago. Kind of coming down and moving across. Oh, I almost forgot. It's not my most expensive magic set because those who have been here know that I also collect some magic sets, but it's the one that I paid the most for over what it was worth. And it's this one right here. And I figure when I'm done talking, if there's time, I'll come back to it and our club president can speak about it a little bit. Continuing on, this is one of John Rogers' traveling magician statues. It was made in 1877, and it's one of 62 known to exist. It's made out of plaster, and John Rogers was the, during the Victorian era there, he did all sorts of these things for your middle income folks. And to give you an idea, in 1877, this would cost you $15. That's what it sold for back then, which was about $370 of today's money. But he primarily did like Civil War groups and things like that. Continuing across this way, that's an original Carter poster that also came from the Marshall Brodeen collection. A lot of the stuff you'll be seeing through this section came from Marshall. Bob Bell was the first bozo in Chicago, and that's basically a commemorative thing from when he passed. An anniversary signed by all the cast members to Marshall. Marshall was also a hypnotist in Chicago, and these are a couple of the photos from his hypnotism show. Coming down this way, that's one of my 2 Wizzo the Wizard costumes from the Bozo show. And this is a mismade cookie. This is kind of interesting because it was built by a gentleman named Alan Puritan out of Indiana in February of 1978. It was custom made to fit Cookie the Clown. And then Marshall performed it both on the Bozo show and then when he and Cookie would go on tours to like state fairs and that type of things. What's interesting about it is Alan was also a performer, and the way Marshall and Roy Brown, who was Cookie the Clown on the Bozo show, met him is they actually had this Magic Masters show and sitting at a table with the wives of deceased magicians like Anne Gwynn, who I'll mention here in a minute, was there. But Marshall and Roy, Cookie, were sitting there, and Alan performed at it. And he actually got like 4 standing ovations. And as he came back to sit at the table, Marshall looked over at him and goes, "I want you on the Bozo show next week." And normally there was a 2-year waiting list, but then he also had Marshall build this for him. It took 5 weeks and cost $800 in 1978. And as you can see here, these are Marshall, who was, once again, Wizzo the Wizard's very first shoes. And what's interesting is you can see, they're true performer shoes. They've got the paint from stuff, and they do the pie in the face routines. And then if I open this up here for you, you can see where they've got Cookie the Clown's costume inside it for the Mismade. Now, kind of going to my main wall, and I'm going to kind of step back so you can kind of get a overall view of it. And I'm not going to go through every single thing on this wall, but first I'd like to say, if you can see that painting there, that's actually a screen-used prop from the Bozo show, and it was used in a skit where there's Bozo, Cookie the Clown, and Wizzo the Wizard on it, and they would come out carrying that, having just come from the painter, and be talking about how great it looked. And then the ringmaster for the circus, Bozo Circus, Ringmaster Ned would come up and go, "Oh, that looks great, but I wanted to be in it with you." And after a little byplay, they would turn it around, and on the back is a solo picture of Ringmaster Ned. And then starting across up there at the top, that is a painting by Roy Brown, who also did all the storyboards for Garfield Goose, if you've heard of him from up there in Chicago. But this was for a Roy Cookie Brown and Marshall Brodeen presented to WGN because, hey, you know, they were on the #1 kid show of all time at the time. In 1997 / early 98, they presented a prospectus along with this painting and a script for a TV series they wanted to do at WGN called The Magic Mansion. And this was going to be a show where Marshall was the host, and he would dress as you see him there. And I also have the top hat in the other room. But each room of the mansion would be themed to a different style of magic, like close-up magic, illusions, and such. And then Marshall would travel from room to room in it, and there'd be guest magicians and such in the different things. Unfortunately, this project never, came to fruition because at the same time as they were presenting it, Bob Bell, who was the first bozo, passed away. And the brass at WGN didn't want two of their stars on, once again, the #1 kid show of all time, getting distracted and involved in other projects. So unfortunately, we missed out on having what I think would have been a cool, another TV magic series that would have been on. Continuing across the top, Marshall was really one of the movers and shakers, especially up in the Chicago area. And several museums would do museum displays about him. They'd have his costumes in there, illusions, and that. And they'd let him keep the signage they made for these displays afterwards, so he would have them displayed in his home. And, I was fortunate enough when I acquired his personal museum to get all this stuff along with it. And then, as many of you may know, John Moring wrote a biography of Marshall, and this is one of the signs that they would have for the signings. They only did 3 autograph signings for this book, one at a Barnes & Noble up in Chicago, one at Tim Felix's Magic Shop in Chicago, and then the third one that they were both at was at the TAOM I had in 2013. Now, the other part of this wall is dedicated to a magician named Jack Quinn. Now, if you haven't heard of Jack, he was a prolific, performer back from the early, 1925 up to his death in 1969. In fact, shortly after he began performing, he was performing many of his original illusions. And here is one of them you may be familiar with. You may know it as the Temple of Binaries, put out by Abbott's, who kind of borrowed it from Jack, if you will. He called it the Temple of Angie after his wife, Anne Gwynn. That's her right there. And he invented this. And these are the only 2 in existence of his original. He had 3 built during his lifetime. The first one disappeared. The story around it goes one of 2 ways. Either it burned up in a fire in his garage, or it fell off the back of the truck on his way to Abbott's. He was living in Chicago at the time. And then, and I was going to say, in 1925, Houdini saw Jack perform and then went up to him and hired him to build several illusions for him. He also built illusions for Thurston and other contemporaries of the time period. And then he packed up the clan and he moved out to California. This picture I'm showing right here is an original theater picture, one of a kind, that was in one of the theaters in Chicago that Jack would perform in. But he moved out to Chicago, and interestingly, he was in several movies out there, including Citizen Kane. The only hint I'll give you on where he is in Citizen Kane is look on the roof, if that'll mean anything to you. But when he was living out in California, he was, I guess you could say, instrumental in John Calvert getting into the movies. And the way that kind of happened was John had decided to give up magic. He sold all his magic stuff and he moved out to California, and he went to visit his friend Jack, and he took a cab over to Jack's place. And there Jack was with the family loading up the station wagon and the little trailer behind it because he just got booked to do a 6-week tour. And so, John said, hey, have a good time, left. But then he was halfway to his hotel in the cab when he realized he'd left his fedora, his hat, at Jack's house. So he had him turn around. But when he got there, Jack had already left. So John goes looking around to see if he can get in to get his hat, and the back door's unlocked. So he goes in, and as he's picking up his hat, the phone rings. So he picks it up saying, Mr. Gwynn's residence. And it turns out it's one of the studios wanting to hire Jack Gwynn to teach Clark Gable how to do some, card moves for a gambling movie he was going to be in. Well, John, being a quick thinker on his feet, says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Mr. Gwynn's secretary, and he's just left on a 6-week engagement, but he would highly recommend this young magician who's just moved to town named John Calvert, who's staying at such and such hotel." And then boom, he jumped back in the cab, got there. There was a message for him at the hotel, and he went on to get that job to teach Clark Gable, but it turned out Clark just couldn't do it. So they hired him for what would have been like 2 weeks for like 8 weeks to do hand doubles during the filming. And as far as his movie career, it only went on from there. Continuing this way across. Oh, and I was going to say, this one here on the left is the third one, third temple that Jack built. Dorney did all the painting on it and everything. And it was built in 1946, and Jack used it until his death once again in 1969. This one over here is the second one, and Jack was very good friends with Marshall Brodeen, and he sold it to Marshall, and Marshall performed with it for many years, including in the Ice Capades. So right now it's used as storage because all these things are full of other stuff. But if I was to open it up and clear it out, you can actually see the cuts in the bottom of it from the girl inside wearing skates. So, that's kind of fun. Coming this way, and if anyone knows anything, this is a painting of Jack done by Louise Diamond. And the only thing I know about her is she never sold any of her paintings. She'd just give them to people that she liked. So she gave this one, to Marshall, and I have 2 others, one of Houdini and one of Blackstone Sr. that she did. But other than that, I don't know anything about Louise. I've searched, I've asked, and seems to be a little bit of a mystery. And up here, let me see, that's a printing plate for one of Jack Gwynn's posters, which you can see right there. And then kind of wrapping up the Jack Gwynn section here, that's his fish bowls for the fishbowl production, another lobby card. And this has nothing to do with Jack on the handle. It's just so that I don't get careless and hit that or my TV. You'll notice the handles are all kind of different. Jack was a Freemason, and one of the stories goes, because if you look on this one, they're all kind of regular, that Jack was in Wisconsin, and basically several of his swords had gotten lost for this, so he just went down to the local Freemasons and said, "Hey, I need some swords," and they gave him a bunch of them for it. And since we're creeping up on 8 o'clock, and as I said, those of you who have been here know this is the tip of the iceberg. I'm just going to kind of swing around so you can kind of see tons and tons and tons of things. Some of it's in disarray because since I'm kind of stuck here at home, I'm like, well, hey, let's do some reorganizing. There's a set of Doug Henning boots and lots and lots of stuff. Dow, you got a quick couple minutes. You want to say anything about this magic set?
No. Yeah, that was done. I can you hear me?
Yes.
That was done back in the 80s. The Shinley Industries had come to me and asked if I can help them put together a card magic kit. This was before Fun was doing a card magic kit, Royal Magic. And if you look inside, this is exactly what's on the inside of the card magic kit today. So we picked out the pieces and put it in, and then they started talking about the cover. And I said, well, I can be on the cover. And they said, no, we want someone that really looks like a magician. And I said, okay, that makes sense to me. And I figured they were going to pick a famous magician. So they did a casting the next week. And I got a casting call for it from the agent at the time that handled my magic. And I went in, and it was like they didn't recognize me. And then they decided none of the magicians they saw looked enough like magicians. So they cast the next week for actors and models. And I got cast by, I was with Kim at that time, Kim Dawson. And so I got a cast again, and I went in again. They said, wow, you look just like a magician. And so that's how I ended up on the cover of my own magic kit.
That's funny.